with Gillian. I'm your host, Gillian. And if the audience will look under their chairs, you will see a free bottle of Tapatio, courtesy of Tapatio themselves. Now, today, we're going to interview a very well-known author for his book, who has also won the Pulitzer Prize. This book is called Angela's Ashes, and we're going to be interviewing the author today. So everybody, please welcome Frank McCourt himself. Let's give him a hand. Hello, Mr. McCourt. It's great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Gillian, on your show. I've always wanted to be on your show before. It's actually quite one of my dreams.
Now, Mr. McCourt, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, Angela's Ashes? It's a very good book, and it has won a lot of prestigious awards, so it must be very good. What's it about?
My story starts off as an introduction to how my parents first met. After my mother, Angela, becomes pregnant with me, she marries my father, Malaki. My mother, Angela, struggles to raise all the children they have while my dad spends all of his money on alcohol. My beloved baby sister Margaret dies, and because of that, my mother becomes very depressed. We move to Ireland, and we decide to leave Brooklyn. And when arriving to Ireland, Oliver and Eugene, my brothers, die shortly after our arrival. My dad keeps drinking but earns my love by telling me stories of Irish heroes. After a couple of years, my mother gives birth to my second youngest brother Michael and my youngest brother Alphonsus, or who we like to call Alfie for short. Like many other fathers in World War II, my dad leaves to find work in England but fails to send us any money. I start working for multiple different people, trying to push my family forward since I'm the oldest and otherwise in charge. Soon, my family gets evicted and moves in with my mother's cousin Laman, who she ends up being lovers with. This angers me, but after a while I begin a relationship with my own, with Teresa Carmody, but she unfortunately dies of consumption. After years of hard work and labor, I finally save up enough money to go to the U.S., and I get forgiven of all my sins before I leave by a priest, so I can leave Ireland with a clear conscience.
Yes, and where does this story take place?
Yeah, the story takes place in the 1930s and 1940s. It starts off as in my toddler years in Brooklyn, and soon after we moved to Limerick, Ireland, which is where I spend my teens, and my adult life is spent as a teacher in the U.S.
Yeah, what would you say your theme and the motif would be about your book? What is that message you want to send to all the readers?
There are three themes in my book which I find to be some of the most important. One of the themes is restrictions imposed by social class and religion. Social class is another theme because of my origins, I was unable to get a job. And because of my religion, there were some things that I was not allowed to do, which really kind of blocked me from doing normal things. Another theme is stories for inspiration. And those stories were about legendary Irish heroes. When my father used to tell me them. That is what gave us that bond that we were never able to achieve with anything else. The last theme is poverty, and this theme really ties in with the motif of guilt. Now, because we were so poor, it made me feel guilty because I was the oldest, so it was my responsibility to find a job and to care for my mother and my brothers since my father was unable to. So those two really tie in together. And not only do I feel guilty about not being able to provide, but I also feel guilty about my teenage years and what usually happens during the teenage years because of my religion. What would you say are the major conflicts or rising actions, falling actions of the book? The main conflict in my story is that I face hunger, I face neglect, and I have to deal with my dad's alcoholism, and I also come down with an illness for some of the book, and I struggle rising out of poverty, but I eventually succeed. The rising action is that I have to deal with all of my father's responsibilities, and since I'm the oldest, I feel like I have to take charge of it, but I dream of coming to America to be successful. The climax is that a priest forgives me of all my sins, so I can leave Ireland with a clear mind when I'm going to the U.S. The falling action would have to be that I earn enough money to leave for America, and I bid Limerick, Ireland farewell. Some of the major characters in the story are myself, my mother Angela, my father Malaki, who can be considered the antagonist because he spends money on drinking while we are starving to death. My brother McCourt Jr., who is the youngest brother by 1 year. Oliver and Eugene, who are twin brothers, but they died shortly after arriving Ireland. Michael is the second youngest brother, and Alphonsus is the youngest. Pa Keating is a very caring uncle I was lucky enough to have, who really gave me that extra push to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And LeMan Griffin is my mother's cousin and her soon-to-be lover.
Are there any quotes that you ever look back on and just think like, wow, this quote, this part of my life really stood out to me?
There is a part in my book that really shows how poor we were, where it says, Mom turns towards the dead ashes in the fire and sucks at the last bit of goodness in the woodbine butt caught between the brown thumb and her middle finger. Michael wants to know if we're having fish and chips tonight because he's hungry. Mom says next week, love, and he goes back out to play in the lane. In Chapter 4, I observe my mother's growing despondency as another week passes without the arrival of a paycheck from my father in England. The ashes in the fire symbolize the crumbling of my mother's hopes, and her dreams have withered and collapsed, leaving her only with cigarettes for comfort. This particular quote is how I got the title for Angela's Ashes, because those ashes were a symbol of her hopes and dreams. They kind of just crumbled, and the only comfort she had really were cigarettes. So that's how poor we were. And the fact that she promised my brother that they would eat fish and chips next week was kind of an empty promise, because we were so poor that next week we would be facing the same type of hunger. Now, another quote would have to be that when I look back on my childhood, I wonder how I survived it all. It was, of course, a miserable childhood. The happy childhood is hardly worth your while. Worse than the ordinary miserable childhood is the miserable Irish childhood, and worse yet is the miserable Catholic childhood. Another very important quote that I find very important is that while I was sick, I came down with typhoid, and I was hospitalized for several months. And in those months in the hospital, I began to read, and I developed my love for literature. And here, in this book, I say, I don't know what it means, and I don't care because it's Shakespeare, and it's like having jewels in my mouth when I say the words. This is beginning to show my development for the love of literature, which will come in very handy later in the book, in my life actually. And even though I did not understand Shakespeare, I liked how the words just came out of my mouth like diamonds, like they just rolled out, and the words were so beautiful themselves, kind of like gems.
Oh, wow. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. See us next time, and remember, have a good cup of coffee, because that starts your day.